Diana, when we look at differential treatment by the criminal justice system, what if I was to take away ethnic and racial labels and instead put on a set of lenses that said, well, poor people get worse treatment by the legal system than rich people do. People who live in high crime areas are treated differentially from people who live in low crime areas. Wouldn't that be a valid set of filters? Is it really because these kids are Latinos, or are there other social factors at play?
I think there's many factors. I think it's, it's interesting because if you were to do it, you would probably try to do some retrogression where you would say, what is the area, what is the economic status, what are the resources available? But I think with that being said, the statistics are pretty clear that Latinos are incarcerated more likely than their white counterparts. So,
of the same socioeconomic status?
Yes.
So what do you do about that? Just point it out and hope that people do the right thing, or is there something that actually that you can do beyond that?
Well, I think these are difficult questions that our country is grappling with. I mean, obviously, the key so far has been obviously for education. Education before incarceration, education of the criminal justice system, education of, the jury members, just education generally. And, there has obviously been a correlation that those who are more educated are less likely to be incarcerated and the like. But the question is, what can be done to change this? I mean, that's a question that we've been grappling with.
I'm glad our attorney, Mercedes Cano, at the end pointed out some of the downstream effects of all of this. When I was a reporter in a big city with a big Puerto Rican population, I worked with young men, and they would tell me about the times that they weren't doing anything, sitting on their stoop, walking down the street, coming out of a convenience store with a soda, and they would have to empty their pockets, they would have to put their hands on the hoods of cars, and it wasn't just that they weren't doing anything malign, it's the public humiliation of being shaken down by people in authority, of being suspected of being in the process of doing something wrong when you're not doing anything, that actually poisons the well. These kids, 16, 17, 18 years old, didn't look at the police as their protectors. They hated them. They assumed, with very little counter evidence, that the police were biased against them, biased against their parents and their families, biased against their communities. And by the time they're 25, by the time they're 30, by the time they're 35, a lot of the people that they grew up with and they know have spent time in local jails waiting to be processed on charges of crimes that they didn't commit. It sets in motion, I think, a very unhealthy attitude toward an institution in society that's supposed to be a wall between you and chaos, a wall between you and violence, a wall between you and being exploited and ill-treated. And it's just a bad idea.
It's so important. I mean, the relationship of the individual to the state, you need to see the state as your protector. You need to see the police as your friend in order to have a good life within society. You can't afford to have the government against you, because no individual is strong enough to go up against the government. So, there's many factors at work here, but when you look at the fact that there's a class of people that people identify more or less with people who look Hispanic, and that classification is illegals. So look at all those illegals. Well, if you have that kind of legal classification that becomes part of the common parlance, what do you expect from people? I mean, if you look at somebody and you say, well, I wonder if they're an illegal or not. What is it, and what is illegal? They've come here without permission, against the quota, without going through the immigration system. What is their crime? They want to work. So if working is a crime, what does that say to the young people that you're talking about? criminals aren't out to work. Most people are out to come here and work, and to the extent we let them, they're not going to be criminals by and large, although there's certainly a criminal element in any population. So there's a lot of things that work, a lot of things we don't know how to do, but we do know there's one thing we can do, which is stop this invidious kind of legal discrimination against Hispanics. And also recognize that the whole system of drug laws has a disparate impact on those who come from the areas where drugs are produced. So many people are just caught up in the sense that they're like innocent bystanders of the illegal traffic in drugs. Get rid of the drug laws. That would be our position. An adult has a right to decide what to put in his body. Get rid of the drug laws, and all the crime and so forth will dry up, and you just have regular export-import of drugs, just like any other commodity. And you would find a great, great positive impact on Latino population as well as the general population.
Brent, certainly be a lot fewer Latinos in jail if you tore down the edifice of the war on drugs in this country.
Yes, although, I think the other question you got to answer, drugs are in some ways, I think I agree 100% with Tom in the rational self-actor, but drugs kind of short-circuit the rational part. And so you may not be acting rationally if you're high on cocaine. And certain drugs perhaps aren't as dangerous as we make them out to be. And others are definitely in the category of short-circuiting the rational thought process. And I think then the public does have an interest in trying to keep those away from people. But I do think you could say, why is all the focus on the folks who are selling the drugs and not so much on the people who are consuming them? Because that's part of why you have this disproportionate impact. But, we shouldn't throw up our hands and say we can't solve the problem of this disparate treatment, because in actual fact, very few states have even tried. And the ones that have, Oregon, for example, said, we're going to try to systematically figure out what's in our laws that are creating this disproportionate impact and try to address it. And they looked at every step of the process. They created trainings for the police, for the prosecutors, for everybody else, and actually they eliminated the disparities, racial disparities in their criminal justice system. So it can be done. The fact is most states aren't even trying. It's not even an issue. The public hasn't even bothered to ask them to try to eliminate the disparities. And then I think that's a problem, but also some states are just trying to bury the problem because they don't even keep the statistics. So they don't even know how many Latino youth are getting incarcerated in particular states because they don't want to keep track of how many are being put in jail. They're just whites, I guess, and they don't even keep track of the stats. So they're hiding it and trying to bury it within the larger statistic.